Yoni, are you on X?
Yes,
What's your handle on X?
Het Goldberg Yoni.
At Goldberg Yoni.
Yoni is Yoni.
Goldberg Yo Yoni Goldberg. And we're talking about JavaScript testing.
What's new in JavaScript testing? Quite a lot.
So just okay, I'll be done in 1 second. Are you also on Blue Sky?
No, never heard about it.
It's the X alternative where the biggest difference is that it's not owned by Elon Musk.
I guessed so. Yeah, I tried out.
Just a second, I'm posting the link there as well, and we can begin. Okay, Steve, you want to take us away?
Yeah, so I'll do a little intro here and then we'll get dive right in. And the editors will fix it all later. Uh-oh. Oh, Dan's still okay. I couldn't tell Dan froze there for a second. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another thrilling episode of JavaScript Jabber. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. With me on the panel today, all the way from Tel Aviv, Israel, is Mr. Dan Shapir. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing well. How are you, Steve?
Doing good, doing good. It's Wednesday morning, first day back at school for kids here, so that's always good. Still hot and toasty there in Tel Aviv, as always.
Yeah. When is it not?
Yeah, it's a little cooler here, starting to cool down a little bit, which is always a bummer, but it is what it is. And our guest today, coming all the way, also from Israel, Mr. Yanni Goldberg. How you doing, Yanni?
Hey, hey. Great, great. I'm really happy to be here today. It's 1 degree cooler here comparing with Tel Aviv. Very hot. But the good news that after 2 months of being at home, kids are finally back at school yesterday
Yes.
or before. So yeah, back to work a little.
Yes. And for those of you that might see Yanni's drink, he is not drinking and podcasting. That is tea, not beer. I clarified that before the episode. So not that it's not okay to drink and podcast, but just clarifying.
I literally drank beer on stage while giving certain talks. My contention is that it only made the talks better.
Sort of loosened you up a little bit. Is that it?
Yeah.
Steve, you probably know. Is it also legit in the states? I know it's you in Europe. It's okay, but if I drink at like at, at the states during a talk, will be considered PC?
I've never heard anything against it. I guess it depends on how well you handle the alcohol, and as long as you
Well,
stay on topic and have somewhat of a sense of humor, then
You're saying that the first two are okay.
in Germany, it's perfectly legit to have beer at lunch during work days.
is
And
it legit or required?
yes, there is something to that.
In
And
Paris,
it's
it's
and it's
required.
really good beer.
Right.
When I worked at Wix, let's just say that we worked hard and played hard, and sometimes played hard during working hours.
All righty. So with that, we will transition into the topic du jour, the topic of the day, which is JavaScript testing and what's going on in testing in the JavaScript world. So, Yanni, take it away. Where do we want to start?
Sure. You want me to start by sharing a few words about myself and my
No, we don't care about that. We just want to know what you have to say. No,
No,
yeah, seriously. Sorry, I'm a little off track. Tell us who you are, why you're famous, and where people can give you money. Or we'll
so
save that for the end. Just tell us who you are.
Sure thing. So, surprise, surprise, I'm a developer, freelancer, and a consultant, doing full stack, a lot of JavaScript. But more than anything else, my love, my passion, the things that I'm trying to specialize in is that all developer workflow and specifically testing. I think that I've worked with more than 40 organizations. Some of them are big name you'll probably recognize on improving their testing. So I literally sat over the shoulders of like hundreds of developers as we try to craft tests that are both efficient and yet simple. Done a lot of mistakes, learned a lot, tried a lot of new frameworks, and I hope to share some of these lessons here today.
Is it the process du jour, basically cursor write tests for me?
Exactly this. Actually, we're about to cover. I would also cover some kind of testing AI trends, mostly the useful parts of AI. So
The
yeah,
scary, just to finish that particular point, the scary thing is afterwards when you make changes and then the tests break, you tell it, cursor fix the test for me, and you're not sure whether it's fixing your test to hide the bugs or fixing your code to fix the tests or doing both or whatever. It can be really interesting. Let's put it this way.
definitely. I mean, I think that one of the first thing one should tune in Cursor or Cloud Code or whatever you're working is that you can let it work in YOLO mode, but I think there is one exception. A human a human confirmation should be made anytime a test is changed. Like you may change my production code, I may inspect each and every line or not, I don't know, but a test changed should supervise that. That's my
That's a good take, I think.
Why
It's
not?
a
I
take.
can't think of any time I'm just going to say, here, write me some code and then commit it or do whatever without looking over it and making sure it works.
Well, yeah, that's easy to say, and everybody starts with good intentions, but at a certain point in time, especially when you're under the gun in certain things and things seem to work and you build a certain level of trust, I've known people to almost, even engineers, almost get to the point of almost vibe coding their way through projects, and I think Yoni's um, statement that if you've got good test coverage, then ensuring that the tests are properly maintained and reviewed is a good way to add a significant layer of trust and security around your vibe coding.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think that people have various degrees of how much they supervise AI generated code. I'm just saying that the least conservative one can be is at least guard your testing. You might do this also for the production code, but I think that letting AI also change tests as it change code, this is the highest highest amount of risk one may take.
Yes. Okay, then. So, what are the latest and greatest trends when it comes to tests, aside from having AI do all the coding for us?
Yeah. So I'll kind of mention some kind of super trends and very impactful changes, and then we can dive deeper into each one of them, at least the ones that we found interesting. So I think there is always in testing one kind of everlasting progress in which we always, every year, we try to get our test to be more production-like without paying the price of. So in the past 2 years, we keep seeing this progress, and in the front end world, for the first time, I think, like we had React testing library ruling this world for a lot of time, tests that runs in Node.js. I think that for the first time, it's safe to say that tests that don't run in the browser, that are not visual, are almost out of scope. There are many new ways and frameworks to run your test in the browser and get the full visual experience and the confidence. So it's more like production, but some of them run really fast. So you're not paying the price of like full-blown end-to-end framework. On the backend side, it means that if you're having a microservice, you can more easily now run it on your computer with all the layers and almost like production infrastructure, and again, without paying a tremendous price. I think these are bold and changes that we're seeing, and I guess we will dig deeper into the specific tooling and their
Just
code.
to clarify, there are obviously layers to tests. So there, I don't know if you should refer to them as higher or lower layers. It's just different positions in the testing cycle. So you've got obviously stuff like unit tests, which should be very relatively small, relatively straightforward, and certainly very, very fast. And they usually don't need special wiring, although you know certain degree or a certain amount of mocking is often involved. Then you've got integration tests and you've got end-to-end tests. It seemed to me that when you were talking about the improvements in our ability to do effective, efficient, and performant testing, you were mostly talking about integration tests and end-to-end tests and less about unit tests, correct?
Yes, and a little no. I mean, I think that first there is a trend. I'm not advocating, by the way, on anything. I'm just trying to cover what like trends that I observe, and I think another trend is seeing less unit test and more kind of component page integration test, also called as the testing diamond. It's a kind of an emerging concept where you should write more integration test. But with the new tooling, even if you write unit test, like take a framework that we will cover that is called Vitess Browser Mode, even your unit tests run in the browser. Now think about it, not all the unit tests in the world are pure. You might test the modules that actually doing some stuff with the web APIs. So instead of running it in Node.js with polyfills and trust the similarity, it runs your test in a real browser, in Chromium, for example. So even your unit test gains more kind of production-like experience. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does. Although I need to think about what I think about it. It's kind of a recursive statement. Because really, when I'm thinking about unit tests, I'm really trying in most cases to be as stateless as possible and consequently not be dependent on having access to a browser DOM, which is kind of like persistent by definition. And so I'm not sure that this is where I want my unit tests to go necessarily. But I certainly appreciate the fact that we don't need to mock browser APIs, DOM APIs, which is always, let's say, less than ideal. But why do you think that is? What has changed that has made this? What has changed that has made this possible now that was not available before?
Yeah. First, it was mentioning that I fully agree. The real value is in integration test, in other words, page testing or component test, also in end-to-end. In unit test, it's indeed less significant. So it's mostly if we double click into the front end world for a start, I think now there is a key upfront decisions the team should make. There is kind of a triangle decision between three different frameworks for testing components and pages, and one of them is new. It's for the past 2 years, and it makes running visual test in the browser almost as fast as unit test. So there was a lot of people trying to avoid that kind of visual experience because of the hassle involved. But with some of the new frameworks like Vitess Browser Mode and the new Storybook model, it becomes easier, faster. So you have less reasons not to just, hey, let's test it like where the user lives. And maybe it's
So
worth at some point explaining what is Vitess Browser Mode, how does it stack with Playwright.
go for it.
Now, is that the
Cool.
same as VTest UI, this browser mode?
Uh, no, not exactly, because
Okay.
you can also have Vitess UI with unit tests.
Okay.
And browser mode is a new sub framework for Vitest, and To zoom out for a second, I think that we have now three major and good options in the front-end world that one must make a decision up front. The first one is Playwright, the good all-known Playwright, a um, very reputable framework that is being very popular, which allows you to test your system as is. Like you can spin up a whole page, and you get a real page in a browser, but you get you get the entire get the entire application with the router and the state and a lot of things beyond the page level or the component what you want to test. So the performance is like a little of concern in Playwright, even when you mock the backend.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Playwright is essentially just a headless Chrome with APIs to automate various tasks. That's more or less it, right?
Yes, and maybe a little more because it can run your test in other browsers as well. Like run the test once and get it running in Chrome or Safari or anything else.
Yeah, because they basically later on added support for the same APIs, as I recall.
Exactly. They ported kind of a CDP protocol for other browsers. Exactly. But on top of this, they also have a very nice and stable API to make the experience of interacting with pages less flaky. So for example, if you're trying to assert on something, they will take care to retry and wait and until that condition is met on the page. So the overall testing experience is really great.
And it replaced all the frameworks like Cypress and Selenium, right?
Exactly this.
Okay, so how is VTest browser mode different from Playwright?
Yeah, so first worth mentioning that VTest browser mode is using Playwright under the hood. So you get a battle-tested engine that you can trust. But what they try to do, Playwright is a little bit disruptive to front-end testing. So if you take traditional front-end testing, with people used to work with things like React testing library, the syntax of React testing library, the concept of React testing library. So porting from there to Playwright was a little disruptive. VTest browser mode allows you to take your existing test or learn nothing new, use the same syntax, same concept, only instead of running it in Node.js, like React testing library, you run it in real browser, which obviously allows you to see. You probably know that really nasty experience when you test with React testing library and a test failed. What you see on the screen is 300 lines of XML, of HTML in a CLI in which you try to understand, is this my component? How does it look like? What's wrong here? I mean, nobody wants to troubleshoot test in a HTML over CLI. With VTest browser mode, you can see them in a browser and benefit from all of the Chrome developer toolbar perks. So that's the premise. That's the obvious upside. They also make it like, VTest stands for fast in French. Vite. The word vite is fast in French, and they stand up to their reputation. Like I already use it in production. It's amazing. I can like test the entire page, some interaction, some kind of specific scenario in 200 milliseconds. It's like blazing fast. You click on a button and you don't have enough chance to see what happened on the screen. So the performance is really awesome. With that, there are some cons that should be mentioned as well. It's very new. It's still tagged as experimental for like 2 years or so. And so it didn't yet stand the battle of time like Playwright. And there are many other decisions that were made that might appeal to some teams and not to others. But it's definitely a bold opportunity, I think, now in 2025 for testing. And I could not finish that. I'm sorry, this is kind of a mini TED talk. But there is also Storybook. And Storybook now changed their model. And now they're using VTest browser mode under the hood, which use Playwright. So you have three options. You know that Russian doll, which is called, I believe,
Yes.
Matryoshka?
Babushka.
Babushka or Matryoshka. Yeah, it's kind of a nested doll.
Yes.
So what we have now in the testing space, it's a matryoshka. So you have Playwright or VTest browser modes that use Playwright or storybooks that use. You got the idea, and uh, you have to make the choice.
So, if you're starting a new front end project today, and let's say that you're using one of the two leading options, I don't know how familiar you are with them, either React, which is approximately 50% of the market, or Vue, which is approximately 20 to 30% of the market. Um, and you want to do testing because we started with testing for the front end. What would you use?
Yeah, that's first a very. I think that the choice is really hard today. I had to choose for a customer like 2 weeks ago, and the decision is really hard. So from one hand, I lean toward being conservative and say, hey, let's use Playwright. It works. It's like the most simple. It's like the last layer. It's simple. It's proven. Let's use it. Um,
Again, Playwright in this case is for mostly for the end-to-end tests, right?
or you can use it also for component or page testing. It has great tooling to allow you to mock your backend. And I think that for the majority of the testing, a front end team want to mock the backend. But yeah,
Hmm.
you can also run end to end.
Well, let's put it this way. If you're not mocking your backend, then you're by definition dependent. It kind of almost means that by definition your tests are going to be flaky at least some of the time.
If you
Uh,
do involve the backend, you
if
mean?
you do involve the backend. So yes, if you want to go for separations of concerns, you want to mock external services, reduce the amount of dependencies that you have on external services, and that includes your own backend.
Totally agree. It's slower, it's more flaky. But my highest concern with end to end is actually that it's really hard to simulate things beyond happy passes. So think about it. You want to test now that the user is disabled. It's a premium user. You get 20 records. All of the things that are beyond the simplest response. With real backend, it might be very hard to tune the backend into each and every scenario that you want. However, when you mock it, you can simply just say, hey, I want this response. I want that response.
Yeah, on the other hand, when you're mocking it, you're basically inventing the responses. So it's not necessarily how the system behaves. It's not really end to end if it's mocking.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you normally like spin up like and maybe this is what you're talking about with mocking, but basically create a test database or a copy of your database, spin one up, seed it. You know, you got your data in it, and then run your test actually using a database. It's not your prod database, obviously, but at least you have a clone in a real database that you're interacting with. Because I know, speaking from personal experience, a lot of times that's valuable testing.
Yeah. Yes, but I think that first, before answering that, I'd like to repeat what Dan said. I think it's like a key point here. If you're doing naive mocking, like hey, I'm just mocking some JSON, yeah, you're now at a risk of doing things that are not exactly the same in production. And this
Mhm.
is why you also need contract testing. And I think this is definitely a topic we want to double click into later because there are new interesting tooling in the JavaScript space related exactly with this problem. How do you create smart and aligned mocks? Now to Steve's point, yeah, in a simple case, it's just a CRUD application. So you set up something in a database and you display them. But in many cases, creating the server response is much harder than this. Let's give you an example. One of my customer, they have a user entity and it might get disabled. How does it get disabled? There is some cron job running every minute and concluding that the user is disabled. So how would you create a disabled user from a test and make the backend run a cron job and tag it? It becomes so much harder than just returning one line. Hey, just give me a disabled user JSON. Am I being clear on this point?
No, it's obviously true. Like getting an application to do exactly what you want can be challenging. and configuring a certain backend application to replicate certain scenarios is a problem. Just think about, you know, the scenario where a customer tells you that they are experiencing a certain problem, and maybe you even have traces that kind of show the problem. Uh, the way that the customer is experiencing it, and now you're trying to replicate that scenario in the lab in order to debug it. We all know how challenging that can be. So I totally agree that replicating weird behaviors or certain edge behaviors that are legitimate and you want to test for in an actual environment that simulates production can be challenging, and it's often much easier to just play recordings of backend responses and effectively mocking the backend. It can be much easier. Likewise, also mocking the front end. You want to test the backend system, then you might use some sort of, I don't know, just post things out of Postman or whatever, or Playwright, rather than actually having an actual front end that, you know, you create a process that clicks through it. Can be much more challenging and more complicated and lengthier.
So is there a point, Yanni, with that example you gave with the cron job, um, is there a point where you have to say, okay, we can't test everything in an automated test and maybe we have to do something manually? Or do you always work under the assumption that everything in prod can be handled with an automated test?
Yeah, so I'd say, based on my experience, as long as you stick to gray box testing, and when I say gray box testing, it's a test that you don't test the entire system, you test one component. You test like the user, like you just put things in and expect some outcomes, but you also run on the same process, like that application. You can simulate anything. I didn't encounter anything that is not simulated. It's hard to simulate as long as your test and the code under test live within the same process. I definitely, in terms of ROI, yeah, I would definitely prioritize and focus on first on the things that the user does and the things that are likely to happen and where the bugs are more severe. But in terms of the technical capability of simulating stuff, I think that today's in the JavaScript ecosystem, I rarely encountered a situation that something was not reproducible.
And I'll add to that that manual testing is kind of like by definition anecdotal. And I hate to depend on anecdotal evidence of correctness. And so even if you do certain amount of manual testing, then record that testing and then turn it into an automated script. It doesn't need to stay manual forever. So a certain amount of manual testing, especially for, I don't know, complex systems, might be required. But again, try to automate it going down the line.
Definitely agree. I also have, if someone is interested, an article that's called "Testing the Dark Scenario of Your Backend," in which I've shown in an Node.js application how in 7 lines test, no test there was more than 7 lines, you can test really critical scenarios that usually teams don't test. Like, for example, test that when your bootstrap, your backend bootstrap phase fails, then then you get the right monitoring. Or test that when your liveliness route is not behaving correctly, you get the right thing. Or when, very common in JavaScript world, when there is a process uncaught exception or handed rejection is happening in your application, do you do the right thing? This is a critical event. I mean, your process might just crash. Do you test this? I showed how, like, in 5 lines of code, you can also cover these advanced error handling passes. So, yeah, I think that.
So again, to summarize what we've talked about so far, so basically what you're saying is that you're kind of promoting more sophisticated tests, usually component level tests or integration tests, less unit tests, and that using modern tooling that you mentioned, like Playwright, like VTest, browser mode, and like storybook testing, it's much easier to do than it used to be, is basically what you're saying, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, much easier than before. And I'd say, I mean, I'm not against unit tests, but I think that for a start, your first step should be what is the user is doing. And the user is not stretching functions or models, right? The user is visiting a page. So I think that the first thing that you should test is your page, how the user interact. And then as you code, if you realize some complex, highly complex logic that you want to isolate, test in isolation for better, whatever, performance, then yeah, go for unit test. But I think that this is kind of contextual and optional.
Well, to be fair, unit tests actually were kind of born out of TDD. So initially, the concept of unit tests, at least for people who take that approach, is basically we first write the tests, then we write the code. Now AI writes the tests and the code, so that's less the approach. To be fair, I've never been able to adopt the TDD model. Maybe I'm too much set in my ways. It just doesn't seem to be the way that I think. But I have gotten value from unit tests. The main advantage of unit tests is they're very lightweight, so they're almost effectively free to run, and they run, and I have them run constantly because I don't care. And if something break, they test very specific things, so you get an instantaneous indication of where that problem is. So you don't need to think about, like with an let's say, especially with end-to-end tests, the test fails. Okay, why did it fail? It often requires pretty significant amount of investigation in order to understand why an end-to-end test failed. And like we talked about before, it could also be related to certain things, that to flaky tests because you're dependent on external services. With unit tests, you're not dependent on everything and anything. You're just testing your own code. It runs very quickly. You're testing a very specific function, let's say, and I made a change in that function. That's why it breaks.
Couldn't agree more. Uh, I observed once something very interesting that Kenneth Beck, for those of you who are not familiar with Kenneth Beck, is kind of the father of TDD, a person who should really appreciate unit tests. And he said in one of his blog posts, unit tests give up predicting suitability to production and inspiring confidence. So it's not about product confidence at all. It's about being writable, fast, and specific. Now, I think that most of the developers are looking in testing for confidence. And yeah, it turns out it's not only about this.
Yeah, there's that famous picture about the difference between unit tests and integration tests, about, building a urinal in such a position that when you open the bathroom stall door, you can't actually get at it. So everything is fine at the unit level, but when you put it all together, it doesn't work. Yoni, we've seemed to have lost your picture. You still with us?
Yeah, I'm working on fixing the camera. The good news is that I'm still online. Yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
cool.
And I think it's worth just revisiting for one last minute that crucial decision between the three front end things. So we've mentioned Playwright. I think that Storybook and Vitas browser mode are also great options, and we didn't cover Storybook. So Storybook, if you have a design, you ask me what would I pick. So if we're having a design system and rely a lot of small components that we tend to communicate and test in isolation, Storybooks gives a very compelling package in which we get first a great workflow of visualizing our component and documenting them, but also a great new testing experience. So you write a test once and you get both accessibility testing. If you have some accessibility issue, you are covered. Visual regression testing without writing any other test. Out of the box, if you are if you are out of the box, and if you're sharing your credit card, visual testing, and also functional testing using Playwright under the hood. So you get
When
very
you
nice.
say visual testing, just to verify that I'm understanding your terminology, you basically mean that if I accidentally, I don't know, change the font or something, it will break my test because the content, the actual pixels on the screen are not the same as they're supposed to be.
Exactly. It should be smarter than this, and it should realize and detect significant changes from like minor improvement, but exactly this things that functional tests can't tell you about. So your side menu is screwed. Something, I don't know, something is totally broken on the screen. A big change in the layout.
You
Think
put
of
a
the
red background or something for testing purposes and then forgot to remove it.
that's a nice example. Yeah. So
So,
Storybook gives you all of this together. Interesting option. On the other end, it's the more sophisticated option. It's it's all the Storybook narratives and Vitas browser mode under the hood and Playwright. So you have a lot of moving pieces to handle. Um,
Is it open source? Is it a paid product or a service? What is it?
it's open source. It's a free product, except I think this is how they make the revenues, except the visual regression test, what you just mentioned. This one is a paid service.
Okay, cool.
hey, just to clarify terms, I know we've talked about different types of testing. We've talked about unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, visual testing. Uh, the one I always get hazy on is the difference between, I guess, what integration testing is, how you define that versus unit tests versus end-to-end test. End-to-end testing. So what's your definition of integration testing?
Yeah,
Because I, without understanding that, it's hard to get Dan's toilet joke about integration testing. So
yeah. Testing terminology is totally broken. I think that if when you say end-to-end testing or even unit testing and integration testing, different people will understand different things. And for this reason, my suggestion: in every company, in your company, name a very specific name for your test, which is not integration and end-to-end. Take for example, just one example. In one of my customer, we used to test pages. We take a front-end page, we isolate it, and the test scope is every time one page. We call it page testing, and everyone understand what page testing means. It's a test of a page. Integration test just might mean three different things to different people. If we try somehow to clarify it, an integration test is, I think that the most common definition of it is that we test the user journey we test the whole user journey in a single tier of the system, not in the entire system. So it might be the user visiting some front end, but without stretching the entire system. It might be a user visit a call coding some backend API and expecting a response. These are examples for integration tests.
So correct me if I'm wrong, it also includes, for example, testing components in isolation. So let's say I implemented a date picker component, that a date range picking component, because you don't get that out of the box in the browser, and I want to verify that it's working correctly, and I can host it within, like, independently, and basically simulate interactions with it. It's not end to end because it's not done in the context of the entire application. So it's not, for example, if you think about, I don't know, let's say some sort of a hotel booking application, it's not done in the context of actually booking a stay at a hotel. It's done in isolation, but it's still done at the level of actual user interface and interactions, not just invoking functions and checking return values.
Exactly. In other words, you are testing the user experience with this in its almost real environment. There is a browser here, there is your code, there is like you have multiple layers here orchestrating together. You have that UI kit, usually the UI kits that you're using, and then you have your code that's wrapping it, and you have sometimes your state manager, and there is the browser. All the moving pieces that exist in production are playing together in this test. In this regard, it's integration.
And if you're talking about non-front end stuff, for example, a node system, it might be testing a particular specific API call. Again, not in the context of an actual complete user flow, and potentially even with certain other parts of the system being mocked, like we said before, and not actually working with, let's say you're working with various external services, you're not actually working with these services, you're mocking them, and you're just testing effectively your particular, let's say, microservice or particular aspect of a microservice in isolation.
Yes, exactly. What I observe that works great for backend teams is testing your entire microservice as is, put the infrastructure on local Docker Compose, test all the layer of the microservice. If you deploy it, you test it, your data access layer, your business logic, your API, but only intercept calls to other services. Otherwise, it becomes end to end with all the downsides that we have mentioned.
Yeah, I'm currently actually doing exactly that in a project that I'm working on, being able to use Docker Compose to effectively recreate the entire system on your own particular on your local developer machine, and then be able to dynamically deploy changes to the specific microservice that you're working on is effectively a godsend. It makes life so much easier when developing in such complex environments.
Definitely. And it's surprising how fast this test is. Like I think usually like a 50, approximately 50 tests for microservice on a developer machine with real database last less than 20 seconds. So yeah, it's a really efficient technique. And maybe it's worth mentioning, if we already discussed backend, that there is now a built-in test runners in Node.js, mostly for backend, I think. And it's really gaining a lot of momentum.
Yeah, it's interesting that it seems that between Node implementing its own testing, built-in testing capabilities on the one hand, and VTest on the other, they're kind of cornering the testing market in a sense. I recall, for example, seeing this post on X, I think, from Ken C. Dodds, talking about how happy he is that the React testing library is no longer needed because effectively all this functionality is now built into VTest, I think.
Yes, and I think it's really interesting to see how people are contributing libraries and ideas together. So it React testing library was a library, but it was also a philosophy of how you test. Now the library is probably fading away, or at least losing some momentum, but the concepts there, the techniques are being totally used in Vitess browser mode and in Playwright, and so many new testing frameworks are taking inspiration and building on this, that it's very interesting to see this evolving process.
So, in general, what would you say? Is it still much more difficult to test the front end than the back end, or are we achieving some sort of parity?
Hmm. Yeah, I tell you that I'd easily said that testing a backend is much easier than testing a front end. Um, yeah, I mean, first, you can also judge it by the tooling. I mean, there are, except that new test runners of Node.js, that is actually bring less features. It's funny because the new test runners that a lot of backend teams are now using, it's um, user brings much less testing features than what used to be like in Jest said. People don't need even all the features, and there are very few like new tooling um, in the backend, except maybe contract testing tooling, which we will mention. However, you see that in the front-end world, there is a bloom and always constant change and struggling to build new tooling that can catch up with the front-end complexity. So
Well, the fact that we actually need the visual testing is an indication of how much more challenging front test end testing is. It's like almost like saying let's test the bits flowing over some network connection and basically try to analyze the system from that. Um, if I'm using like a silly analogy.
Yeah.
So you were talking about, you mentioned contract testing. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, definitely. I think that this is now one of the most interesting fields in testing in overall. Uh, I would even say that if in 2025 you're not doing you're coding against API without any explicit contract, it shouldn't be an option on the table. First, let me explain the risk. So we are all consuming APIs, whether front end to backend, backend to backend, and almost every system is distributed. Now, if as a consumer of an API, the payloads that I'm sending and receiving for me are just kind of unknown JSON, some kind of JSON that I can't control and predict, then I'm at the risk of um, receiving a lot of breaking changes. So say, for example, things work, but then the APIs that I'm consuming change something. My test pass, but production will fail. And we are at this point we are really good at testing our component, but the ocean that ocean between components, we have much less testing ways and techniques to ensure the two different parties are aligned on the API between the two. And now there is a bloom of new techniques and tooling to cover exactly this. As an API consumer, how do I know? How do I get a guarantee that the payloads are changing and I should be prepared for that?
So, what are the solutions in this space?
Yeah, so there is a spectrum of tooling and options. The simplest one, just in a monorepo, just create ZOD schemas, share them between the backend and the front end, and you get a solid protection, right? I mean, whenever the backend changes the schemas, your front end test, or it can be also your backend test, will fail because you have now you can generate typing from these schemas. You can also do runtime validation, and you're protected. But it doesn't cover a lot of risk. On the other side of the spectrum, the more fancy tooling are mocking servers that will let you know that will provide you with a very sophisticated mechanism to synchronize the two parties. But there is the middle. I think that most of the solutions that are somewhere located in the middle between that are not too complex and not too simple and are not simplistic use the following. The API provider generates open API. Usually it comes for free, and it somehow share that open API with the consumer. Now all the consumers have tooling to generate both types, but also runtime validation out of open API. So now as a front end, for example, whenever my backend changes the open API, if my types, it says that a new field was added, my code will generate types based on this open API. And if I'm trying to access some field that doesn't exist anymore or is the wrong type, I will get compile time or testing failure right away. So it's kind of me and the backend are always aligned without spinning up a complex and fancy end-to-end environment.
Yeah, but like you said, it almost kind of necessitates in many cases working in a monorepo. Otherwise, first of all, I hesitate to call it tests. I mean, it's basically, one of the benefits of using static typing is that you get certain bugs become impossible because of the type system, but I don't really consider it to be tests. It's basically, let's say, you could call it
Yeah.
another step in your build that might fail, but I hesitate to call it tests. Maybe it is. I don't know. That's an interesting
Yeah,
philosophical
so
question.
so some of the fancy solutions are going beyond static typing. So what they do is that if you have an open API, it's not all about typing. Some kind of the assertions there are can be asserted only on runtime. Say, for example, you have a regex. Some of the fields type is a regex. You can't assert this in typing in TypeScript. Also, TypeScript is now adding some kind of regex support. So what these tooling are doing during testing, whenever you are sending to your mock some payload, they are verifying whether the received testing payload is indeed conforming to the Open API definition. So in that regard, they can make the test fail if what you're using, the payload you're using, is not what the backend, the API, defined.
Hmm.
So
Cool.
for this, you need like real testing. And maybe it's worth mentioning one more very cool features. I guess you both know MSW. It's a very popular JavaScript library for mocking intercepting HTTP requests.
No,
And
sorry, I don't.
oh, okay. So let me introduce it. MSW uh, is a library that allows, by the way, both also Node.js, also backend. It allows you to kind of define in your environment, kind of intercept network request and say, hey, whenever I'm approaching another API, say the backend, intercept it. In browser, it's using, by the way, service workers. So you will see the request in the network tab in Chrome, but instead of going out outside your browser, MSW will return the response uh, on behalf of your API. So you get a much faster and more predictable working environment. Now, MSW added a new feature this year, and we're discussing recent changes, that instead of you defining what will be the API responses, and you might be wrong there, right? What you think that there might be 3 fields in this payload, the backend, in fact, in production will return 4 or 2. MSW generates the responses from the backend Open API. So you provided, hey, this is what the API provided us, the real world, the real schema that was generated, and it takes and generates responses based on this. So it's kind of you and the API that you consume are aligned, are always aligned. Does it make
Cool.
sense?
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah, MSW stands for mock service worker, in case that wasn't clear. But
Yeah.
alrighty. So before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to talk about real quick that we have not yet covered in this world?
Um, Let me see. I've prepared a table of content here on the side. We can discuss a little bit more about testing with AI. Also, we have covered this. Um, Nothing insignificant. I said we have touched the major points in advancement in testing.
All right.
So, if before I do have a final question though in this context. So, when you're brought into a new project, and you want to, before making any changes, I assume you want to make sure that you have good test coverage, because who wants to start making changes in a project before we have good testing coverage? What's the main thing that you're looking for in order to say this project has good test coverage versus another project that you might say this project does not have good test coverage?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I'm even struggling to answer it. It's so deep. Um, but I think that I'm using two heuristics for this. Um, the first one is unfortunately not empiric. It's not measured. If people are moving, if people are really are having confidence to deploying fast and just feeling confident to do it, you see it. I mean, you feel it. They trust their testing. That's, I think, eventually the ultimate test. On top of this,
So
I'm
it's literally, just to pause you for a second, it's literally that subjective feeling that you test. You can ask people working on the project, how well do you trust your tests? If you make change and it makes its way all the way to being deployed to production, how secure do you feel about it working properly and not breaking any of the things or introducing any form of regression? It's essentially that that level of subjective feeling in the team,
Yeah,
is what
that's the
you're
bottom
saying.
line. I'm also using test coverage. I'm using branch coverage. Yeah, I know that it's not a perfect metric, but it's a very simple metric. And for the majority of teams, they are not fooling themselves. If system has very high branch coverage, it means that the testing are indeed uh, testing most of that 90 coverage. Not all of them, but a high percentage of this. At least it tells me that most of the system areas are trying to be tested. On top of this, I usually add some kind of mutation testing. So mutation testing means that it's a framework that plant bugs in your code. Like it can plant a bug in each and every line, and then it runs your test and ensure that they fail. And if
Mm,
yeah, now because I mean it's amazingly efficient technique to realize testing efficiency, but on the other end, it's really slow and cumbersome. So what I usually do, I run it like I run it occasionally, just to get a sense of what is the ratio between the code coverage and the mutations. So in other words, if I see that I have code coverage of 90% in a file, say a file has 90% coverage, and the mutation score is very low, it tells me that this is a nonsense coverage. You know, that test just visits Amir Kodofe, but it's not asserting on anything. On the other hand, if I see correlation between coverage and mutations in file, I know that this coverage is authentic. It's like trustworthy. So this is the empiric side of measuring the test.
cool. Okay. Thank you for that elucidation. Is that how you put it, Steve?
Elucidation.
Elucidation. Correct.
There you go.
That's the word I was
I'll
looking
Google
for.
that word right
Yes,
after our
elucidate.
call.
To explain something clearly is basically what it means. So that is the word of the day, elucidate. Alrighty. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are that part of the show where we get to talk about anything we want to, within reason, of course. Uh, Board games, books, food, movies, tech, if you want to. I'll go first. And my pick, I do have a pick before I get to the high point of the dad jokes of the week, and it has to do with dad jokes. So at the end of our podcast episode that Dan and I recorded with Ryan Carniano and Tanner Lindsley, I found out something that I wasn't aware, that Niall Crosby, who was the founder of AG Grid, had died, and apparently in some type of helicopter accident.
Well, it's to be fair, it's not new. It
Right,
happened
I
a
know.
while.
It's the first I'd found about it, So yeah, that just tells you how out there in the news I am every day. And that brings back memories for me. So 4 years ago, we did a JavaScript Jabber episode with Niall, myself, and AG, and excuse me, AJ O'Neill and Chuck. And the reason that it was episode 504, it came out in October of 2021. And this was one of my favorite episodes, as I mentioned before, because when it got to the end, Niall just jumped right in and threw out a whole string of geek dad jokes um, that had to do with going to a NoSQL bar and there was no tables. So then he went to a SQL bar that had tables, but he couldn't join anybody. And it was awesome. I was giving him a standing ovation. So that's my pick of the for the week. Is you can find it on Top End Devs, episode 504, and if you want to look at the transcript or listen to it, it's one of my faves. So with that, we'll get to the dad jokes of the week. Um, so, question: how come nobody laughed at the joke about the faulty guillotine? It was poor execution.
That's good.
All right. My wife told me the other day, I'm really getting sick of you overusing contractions. And I said, it's what it's. And then someone threw a can of soda at me today, or I'd say pop on the West Coast, but I'm all right. It was a soft drink. And those are the dad jokes of the week.
And those were definitely dad jokes.
Yes, they were.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I understood two of the three. I promise to rewatch that section and catch up.
Okay. Yeah, I can explain. Yeah, it sort of kills the joke when you have to explain it. So I'll explain it later.
Explaining that joke is.
Dan, what do you got for us?
Okay, I've got a couple of things. So first of all, I posted it on X, but I also want to shout it out. A big thanks to Theo, also known as Theo3GG, who puts out a lot of content online. I'm working on a project that involves Stripe integration for one of our services, and I've not worked with Stripe significantly, I think, ever. So I was kind of learning a lot about the Stripe APIs and how it works, and they seem great. But Theo's video was essentially all the Stripe gotchas that he encountered while working on various projects and how to overcome them. And it was very helpful. It came along at just the right time, and undoubtedly saved me from a lot of pain down the line. So thank you for that, Theos. Thank you for sharing this information. This is what sharing on the web is all about. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Another is that we did this kind of watch along party at work. It's something that we tried for the first time and got a lot of good responses. It's great when you can have somebody in at work giving a talk on a particular topic, but it's not always possible. Obviously, you may not have experts in house on everything. So what we actually did is we wanted to learn more about MCP, and Jack Harrington, who we've had on the show a couple of times. He was also one of the hosts on the React podcast, and he created a series of videos about MCP that are just excellent. So we watched several of them in a row. They're actually fairly short each. They're like 10 to 20 minutes each, and he explains things so well. So we basically watched a video and then had a brief discussion about it, and then watched the next video, and so forth. And it was really great, and I highly recommend this if you want to like educate people at work. It's a great approach, I think. And the final thing I want to shout out is that I recently encountered this video. This guy does videos about old hardware, and he released a video about the personal computer from the early 80s, really, called the TI 994A. And the reason that this hit close to my heart is that that was my first
Hmm.
personal computer when I was a kid. It was a very weird and wacky machine, and he literally kind of opened the screws and showed the inside of how that machine worked to explain why it was so weird and wacky and why it worked the way that it did and what was good about it and a lot of things that weren't so good about it. And it brought back a lot of memories. So I'll share that link to that video. Let's just say that it was really interesting to program for a system that had all of 4K of RAM. In these days of gigabytes, this is all we had.
Man, that brings back some
Uh,
memories.
yeah, that's it, 4K of RAM. And within that 4K of RAM, I implemented a Donkey Kong like game that had two screens, and I was like 13 at the time. So yeah,
Which
it was
language did you use? I'm curious.
basic because that's what it had. uh,
Yeah.
it was it. I joke that it simultaneously got me into programming and kind of also scarred me for life. So,
My
uh,
first job in tech was doing tech support, and we were dealing with Windows 3.1 with our software, and I was constantly having to help users with memory issues and upper memory and lower memory and shifting things around so that things could run. And then Windows 95 came along, and a lot of that went bye bye.
I
But
have
man,
a
that
whole
was
story about that, but we don't have the time. We could
yeah.
probably do an entire episode on reminiscing. So those would be my picks for today.
All righty, Yanni, to you.
Yeah, recently found myself highly interested in quality coffee. So I realized, mostly in the coffee story. So I realized, I always thought that like an expensive coffee is like expensive wine. You just pay for, for that brand or for that weird taste. But Then when I started reading more and more and see videos about testing, I realized that like between the farm and your cup, there are like 10 mistakes. It says that there are like dozens of mistakes. Most of them are intentional to just cut cost and make the coffee horrible. Take for example, in many commodity farms, when they pick the cherry, when they collect the cherry picks, some of them are already just mature and some are unripe. Well, some are red, some are green. But they have to be efficient, so they just take the entire tree down. You get coffee beans that are ripe, unripe together. Some are really sour, some are really sweet, and that's just one thing that the coffee production is doing in order to bring you coffee with lower cost and more revenues for them. And really, getting a great cup of coffee demands a lot of decisions and optimization all over that process. And there's no point here. It's just a very fascinating journey that involves biology, nature, people. Yeah. Other than that, I realized that we are becoming more and more dependent on LLMs, right? I mean, we're about to use it for 10% of our coding, or maybe 90%. I mean, yeah, it's subjective. And I felt like it's too much of a black box for me. I can't understand the mechanic there. So say, for example, I'm providing it with 50 instructions, it's respecting 30. Why? It fits inside the context window. Why did you ignore 20 of them? So I bought a book, which is called, I wanted to understand this box from inside. I bought a book that's called Building an LLM from Scratch. It's just teach you to build all the layers of an LLM. Of course, a very simplistic one, but you get idea of all the moving pieces. I'm now reading it, coding it, and I think that after processing 4 chapters, I can surely recommend it.
All right,
Excellent.
to go back to your first pick, all I will say is that the term quality coffee is an oxymoron. So there is no such thing. And I'll leave it at that. So, all right. Well, thank you, Yanni, for joining us today and talking about testing. Appreciated you coming here. Before we go, if people want to get hold of you and give you money and do all that kind of stuff, where's the best place to track your genius?
Oh, thanks for mentioning this. Well, my GitHub page has contacts. There is also goldbergyoni.com.
And you said that you work as a consultant, so I assume that you give assistance, training, and help organizations improve their testing and test coverage and quality of test and whatnot.
Yes, workshops, hands-on hand holding, any kind of assistant and training related.
And that's at Yoni Goldberg?
Goldberg
Or
Yoni.
Goldberg Yoni, excuse me.
Yeah.
All righty. And Yoni is YONI, just
Yes.
for those who might
Yeah.
be
Or
listening.
github.com/goldbergyoni.
Okay. All righty. Well, that is it. Another thrilling episode is in the books. Thank you for joining us, and we will talk at you next time on JavaScript Jabber.